Thank you very much, Jussi, and hello, everybody. This is a
Hi.
really
Hi.
cool experience, right? My lord, this is the first time I do a keynote in virtual reality, but I
Wow.
do really look forward to it. I should start to push something on my screen here, which is the presentation before I get going. And hopefully that will be doing the trick in a few seconds. Meanwhile, as Jussi said, I'm heading up strategy in Sodexo since a few months, since January. And I've been in the workplace industry or work life industry or facilities management industry, whatever you would like to call it, because it has different names currently, since 2004. Before I was working for EY or Ernst & Young, that somebody recognizes as another name, as a consultant working only with facilities management outsourcing all over the world. And before that, some 7 years for CBRE. So I've been in this facilities management industry or workplace industry for since 2004. The time flies. I do not call myself a workplace nerdy geek somewhere around it, because I do think the workplaces of this world is some of the most interesting things we have, and how they're now changing as part of the pandemic, and that's what we're going to talk about today a bit. I do not see my presentation on the big screen here, but I see it on my smaller TV.
Yeah, just press the present button on the top left corner, and
super.
then others will see it as well.
Let's see here. So that's
coming up.
Cool. Yeah, and I think what more, it would be interesting, of course, to hear all of the reactions, thoughts coming, around my pitch here today. But I think I'll be looking at having 15 minutes, 20 minutes around this presentation, and feel free to shout out loud all the time. I think that's perfect. If there are some things that you don't agree with, or if you love it, you can say that too, of course. So now, we have this. Now it works. Really cool. So the headline of today is how to create a company work-life strategy for the new flexible work life. So this reveals a few things on what I'm going to address today, but it builds on the experiences we have, as Jussi said, being the world's 19th largest employer. But what maybe not everyone knows is that we have most of the largest companies as clients too. So we've been there on the ground, serving the offices of the largest organizations in the world since day one, when it all started in Wuhan. So that's pretty interesting, because we'll share the experiences from many of these things. And what I do also would like to say before we start is that work-life is something that we probably have experienced a big change in during the last 12 months. How your life intersects now with work in a different way than it did before. So shifting slides here, I'll just do like this. Is this the way to do it? Yes. So first of all, some remembrance with all of these gloom and doom around the pandemic and the workplaces of the future. Are they kind of dying, or are they disappearing, or not? I think it is worthwhile just spending a few seconds on this photograph with Barack Obama, where he fist bumps with a custodial worker somewhere in Washington. And that's when I get really, really proud, because we as an industry and facilities management, serving all of the offices and people that work, whatever services we can, we touch pretty much everyone every day, independent on who they are. May it be the US president or someone else, but all of them are just as important. And I think I got so proud when I saw this photograph of our industry that I represent here today. We are, as we have been a bit cocky over the last months from Sodexo and myself and our white papers that we have been issuing, We are in the middle of a paradigm shift, and these are quite big words. And what do we mean by it? Yeah, we are in a paradigm shift because we have opened up the Pandora's box around working from somewhere else than the office. And that's also part of, I would say, the most important points that I will be conveying today. That we are in a paradigm shift. Our surveys point out that a lot of people will continue working from somewhere else after the pandemic. And what does that mean from a positive or negative perspective? That's very interesting to think about. In our last survey, and a last big survey from November, where we surveyed some 700 HR leaders, they expect a quadruple of people compared to before the pandemic that will be working from somewhere else than the office, either from home or from a third place. So amazing, right, to think about. 4 times more people will work from somewhere else than the office. That's why we are in a paradigm shift. So that produces a few real ramifications in our world, in our societies. We, as often called a supplier, although we are the world's 19th largest employer, we are a supplier to our clients. We really need to start thinking about how we change our value creation to our clients, because no longer we can expect to be paid for our services, whether it be a restaurant in an office, receptionist services, audio video equipment services, floor managers, community managers, all of these cool jobs that exist in our industry that are now changing because people are not in the job on the office all the time. But how do we then change that? That's something for us. For all employers out there in the world, probably you most of you are part of a company or you own or run a company. This is where it gets really tricky, right? How are we going to make policies for the new and next generation work life where people are no longer expected to be all the time in the office, probably? How are we going to create flexibility for people to choose wherever they would like to work, at the same time as we do not lose important things as productivity, innovation, just getting to know each other and keep relations intact. And for society at large, I don't know how many of you have been thinking about it already, but if a quadrupling of people start working from somewhere else than the offices, this regular movement in the society from work to home, to work to home, will gradually kind of cease or stop. What does that mean for IT infrastructure in this society? What does it mean for traffic planning, entire city planning? Do we no longer need to have this pendulum effect, or at least to a much less degree? These are big changes for society at large, and that's part of the main points here. Oops, sorry, 2 times. I'll just back one up.
No, det kan jag göra.
There we go. So what we are doing currently as one of the large service companies, of course, to understand how we can help and build value for our clients when their employees are working from home. And we'll come back to more stats about it later, but far from everyone feel good working from home. So they would need some support, right? They need to have new type of support that they have in an office that they don't have when they're working from a third place or from the home. The workplace needs probably a revamp to be something else. The role of the workplace in the future will shift. That's not a question. It will become probably, I think, much more important for everyone. And of course, in dialogue with our client leaderships out there, with all of their offices, all of their people working on how are those leadership going to support, for example, things like corporate culture. Maybe it's only in my world, but I do think that most companies out there right now are experiencing a corporate culture flat tire. And that can be seem a bit negative, but how do you actually maintain levels of corporate culture according, if you compare it with pre-pandemic feeling of working for a company when everyone is working from home pretty much. So that also goes over thinking about your part of a team for a big company or small, medium size, doesn't really matter. What actually happens now as well, depending on the choices you take as leaders for the company's real sustainability. So if we can reduce, for example, travel by 50%, not only between different countries and individual flights, but also everyday pendulum work, kind of travel between homes and offices, that's fantastic. And that's also why I think the UN agenda will be even more important now after the pandemic. But again, addressing things like innovation, many people think about it. How can we work with innovation now when we don't meet face to face? Some countries are starting to open up, yes. Some companies are doing it as well, but we probably need to provide new tools and new ways to work with innovation, because many people out there, they feel that they are part of an email chain sometimes. Quality of life, I don't know. How many think you have better quality of life right now than you had before the pandemic? Raise your hand. Okay, so pretty much half, I would say, in my calculation. So actually better quality of life, but also some of you experience probably less quality of life and for good reasons. And we will come back to why these things happen. They're very different and very individual. And I think for me, when I represent Sodexo here and this industry, workplace industry or work-life industry, we have never been more relevant than we are, because we are on the top of leadership teams' agendas to find out the next generation work-life strategy. So the facilities management companies that just were providing cleaning or food or different type of amenity services are now super important for most companies to build this work-life strategy. And that's also why the complete society now is in a transformation when it comes to work-life. Public health, think about it. 50% of you said you have a better quality of life, and the rest are probably worse. According to Nick Bloom at Stanford University, this is no surprise. He says in his research, because he's one of the leading authorities in the world of flexible work studies, is that most people make a self-assessment in the beginning of such a crisis as the pandemic has been. You get more time, less travel, you feel better, and you kind of raise your own health and quality of life. But what to expect now a year later is increased stress, more difficulty of divvying up professional time between private time, increased stress because of more work. People have difficulties of stopping working when they're working from home, for example, because it's no natural break during the day. So I think as a society as a whole, this work-life question is one of the most important ones to really solve right now, because we are there are some pretty solid signs that we are sitting on a ticking public health bomb if we don't do this right. So summarizing this a bit, what has happened faster that nobody probably could anticipate is that we've been going from working in a workplace somewhere in February last year. In March, April, we were all sent home with our gear to kind of figure out how to work in more kind of a workspace environment where your screen on your computer has been the connection to work. And now, a year later, this work-life paradigm shift is happening, where we probably will not go back to the offices to the same extent as before. This is also why it has been super interesting being kind of head of strategy for such a company as Sodexo in the service industry, serving all the working people of this world, to do analysis and package our findings in white papers. So here you see on 2 of our papers we have using on the left-hand side. Beyond the pandemic, it was the first one, and now last week we launched this why every company leadership needs work-life strategy. So this is the main point of today's keynote as well. So it's really fresh. It's almost you're almost the first persons that hear this presentation. We had one last Friday, but today is also a very special day. So looking at it, remote work is part of the new normal. If you look at the statistics here from the left to the right, what we have seen now through our surveys with Harris Interactive, with Novus and a few other survey companies, is that already now companies are cutting their leases, or they're even leaving buildings in favor for moving out of city centers. So that's interesting, right? Because they see that they need to do something now when people are expected to work from home in a much higher degree. If you look at the Swedish numbers here, I've chosen to isolate this, is that on average 30% are now working from home 2 to 3 days a week in the whole country. In Stockholm it's around 50%, or close to 50% at least. And to the right-hand part here, it's where you also see that some 29% expect that they will continue to work remotely, at least 2 to 3 days a week. So that's the perspective of the workers. But for the rest of the service we have been doing it kind of from the corporate perspective. Even more alarming for, I would guess, many companies out there is the far right here. Nearly 30% of people would prefer to work from a third place. Not from home, not from the office, but from somewhere else. And that's where it becomes really interesting as well, to see the trends of hub and spoke models, smaller offices close to children's schools, for example. So these are trends that are emerging. Even more importantly, I think this is something that I lack in the general opinion right now out there in media and in social media, is actually how it feels to work from home. So we've been surveying that too. If you look at the left-hand side of the picture, some 49% of the employers, they really find it hard to take the responsibility for their employees' health. Just think about that. Half of the companies think it's super difficult to take the responsibility. Some 41% of the employers also experiences that there is a worsened psychosocial work environment. They feel that it's not as good as it was before. Many people are getting tired of sitting in their own kitchen, for example. And as well, 46% of people surveyed, they are less active than before the pandemic. So their physical health is deteriorating too. So if you look at it from another perspective, we have also seen that the need for therapeutic services is rising to never seen levels before. Divorces are becoming much more frequent, and there are many things that happen now that are not being discussed to probably the adequate level in society. So on the right hand side, just to finish this off, how does it feel when we work remotely? According to Harris Interactive, this is one of our global partners, the impact of lower mental well-being on productivity is something that in November some 75% indicate that it's worse. It's just so serious numbers that we need to take into account here. But of course, a new work life also create new possibilities. How can we now learn from what has happened during the pandemic? What did really work well for people when they were working from home or a third place? When did they really feel good? And how can we use all of that information we have from companies or individually to build something that is better? Many companies are trying their best, but it's not easy to get this equation immediately on the table and say, this is for our company how we are going to design the next generation work life. At the same time as we make it sustainable for the people and attractive as an employer brand, because that's also something that comes into mind, right? I already now see that if two comparable companies are kind of trying to fight for the same talent will always choose the companies who have really thought and built an attractive solution that allows for homework from a third place and from an office where the office is great for productivity and innovation. So what we have done, we have built a model here, and I'll try to explain how this works. With all of the data and information you have now heard this far, there is a way of looking at to create a sustainable work life, and it begins at the top, where it's really, really smart to do market analysis, to start comparing and looking. If you are Salesforce, for example, what does your competitor do? How are they building their solutions? What is Spotify doing, for example, with their work from anywhere policy and strategy? I guess someone have read about it and really think it's interesting to follow this debate. I think the market analysis here is to keep up to date, really understanding what matters in the market and what works. Because there was really early in the pandemic, if you remember, there were quite a few companies who said, we will go digital first, or almost 100% digital and never meet up. That may work for some, but I think it will be really difficult for most. Number two, the green one here, learnings from the pandemic. I don't know if your companies have been doing assessments, sending out to your organizations, assessing what has been working well and what has not been working so well, and really trying to do this analysis. There is good reason to do it because I think one of the most interesting topics is the demographics in this. Who are having or experiencing the worst days now during the pandemic? It's actually the younger talent or the younger generation workers in the organizations, because they don't, most of the time, they can't afford having a big apartment or a house to live in. So they have to share the kitchen table with their boy or girlfriend or something similar. And they are also really dependent on understanding the ways of working in the company. Maybe they've never been onboarded. They may have started in the company in and during the pandemic. How can we increase and make better onboarding procedures, for example? Number three, the strategic needs. This is, I think, one of the more tricky things, but this is about company strategic needs. What do we as a company want? Where do we think we will be finding our talent from today and 5 years ahead, for example? Which countries are we going to look at? Where will we be having offices? Where will we not having offices? Is innovation important for us? In that case, will we have the right facilities to make innovation happen? Is productivity important for us? How will we do that when we now have a new operating model with people working from all of the different places we can think of? So if you see this as a funnel with all of these data and information going downwards, we have developed something we call a Portability Index. So the portability index definition is the amount of people who actually can work from somewhere else than the office in a sustainable way. So it's of course a complex equation, but I think this is important to talk about. We as Sodexo, I think we have, if you just do the math really easy, some 95% of our organization, they are tied to their workplace, where they either work in a kitchen, they are working as cleaner, community managers, receptionists, and these kind of jobs. So they are tied to that space. But the rest, the 5% that remains, we can start thinking about it for the market, from a market analysis, from a learnings from the pandemic, from a strategic need, of course, and then do our conclusions from that. This looks different per company. Every company is unique when it comes to the portability index. So this is a model where we use now in our strategic dialogue with our clients, trying to help them to set their strategies for the next generation sustainable work life. And to even make it more simple and start, when you have done your analysis for your work-life strategy, where do we start then? We use this triangle again, where we look at which tools will we now be providing to our organization and people working. For example, Glue. Will we do that internally, or will we even build that into services to our clients? The culture here becomes super important, as I said earlier. I do believe personally that most organizations and companies, they have a cultural flat tire going on. Because, think about it, what should I take? I used to work for Ernst & Young. They had a really cool vibe, consulting vibe, where project teams moved all over the place, meeting clients, new cities every day, every week. Now they are working from home, and they are a huge part of a younger generation working. They experience something completely different than they expected from that corporate culture. Flexibility, number 3 of this in the kind of the ending model here. Many talk about flexibility as the key. I do agree on that, but it's the right type of flexibility. I don't know if you have heard about the Wednesday Mountain, and that's one of the best examples of how flexibility is used wrong. So I have a few clients right now where I talk about this thing, where the Wednesday Mountain happens because there is no strategy in place, where leadership tells every department manager that they will decide for their department if and when they should show up at the office. Most department managers in these organizations say, but let's try to show up 1 or 2 days a week. So what happens is that all the departments do pretty much the same thing. Nobody shows up on Mondays because of energy. Nobody shows up on Fridays because it's after work pretty soon. And most people show up on Wednesdays. So everyone comes in on Wednesdays, and suddenly the office and the services there too are too small. So this is why it's important to think about the right flexibility here. How do we orchestrate the people flow to our offices, and how do we make that happen in a good way? So that's just an example of how flexibility is important. So I do want to just finish off with saying that you have gotten a lot of information now from our white papers and how we follow the industry, what happens, and how we are doing our dialogue with our clients and internally, of course. But if you want, you can download this white paper. It has been received very well this far in the market as something interesting to take into account for companies. Okay, that's my end here. I'll look forward to have a few discussions with you here virtually, but almost live in this new work life. Thank you very much.